Hello, and welcome to the session today where we're going to be looking at successful futures and primary geography and how the two can be linked together. My name is Mark Williams, and I'm joined by my colleague here, I should say, Bethan Rowlands. Now, I've put our email addresses here on the screen. If you do have any questions, you might want to email those to us during the session and during the break in between the two sessions. But also you'll need those email addresses because you're going to be sending us some work during the break between the two sessions today. So just jot those down for me for a few moments, please. Okay, now we're going to move on to have a look at why we teach geography. Well, what I'd like you to do is to think carefully about why we should be teaching geography to primary age pupils. Imagine that you're on your placement. You've got on the bus in the morning to go to school. You sit near to someone who starts asking what you do, and then when you tell them, they ask what you're teaching this morning, you tell them that it's geography. Their response is, I don't understand why you bother teaching them something like geography. They should spend their time learning the 3 R's. We'd like you just to spend 2 minutes listing as many reasons as you can come up with to justify the importance of young children learning about geography. Just write this down on a post-it or a piece of scrap paper, and we'll get back to you in around 2 minutes' time. Okay, I'll leave the camera on and I'll just sit here in the corner of your screen drinking coffee. So it's a bit like having Grandad with you for Christmas. Okay, your 2 minutes starts now. Okay, we're down to around 60 seconds. Okay, your time is up. What we'd like to do now is share the reasons that we think geography is important as a subject to be taught in the primary school. Well, hopefully you're able to come up with at least 5 justifications for studying geography. As teachers, we often ask children to list or remember in groups of 5. As humans, we find this the easiest number to group things into. There's a theory that there's a connection to the number of digits we have on each hand, which probably explains why Bart Simpson is a pretty awful student, but then doesn't explain why Lisa is quite successful. But there we are. Now, I've put my thoughts collected into 2 paragraphs on this slide. I won't insult you by reading these out to you, because I know you'll probably hate the idea of that, but I will unpick what I mean a little to try to make things clearer. Now, I've stated here that I believe geography helps to inspire curiosity and fascination with the world. Now, surely these are key elements that we want to instill and we want to create with our pupils. Without a fascination and curiosity for the world around them, how can we expect them to develop a desire to preserve or to protect the environment, to respect what they see around them or what they read online about the environment? I've also talked about equipping children with knowledge about different places and people, and developing an understanding about both the physical world, so the mountains, rivers, the wildlife, etc., and also human processes, so for example travel and tourism, or the effects of pollution and global warming upon the planet. Now, very few children aren't moved by the image of that lone polar bear standing on an iceberg, And this is where geography can be a great conduit for other subjects. So for example, if we're thinking of English, children could be writing speeches or poems, so speeches to their MPs, poems about the plight of wildlife. In drama, they could be acting out important UN meetings where they're discussing topics such as global warming. Now, there is also a close link with chronology, and so a close link with history here, because I've talked about how the Earth's features are shaped and altered over time. Now, if we're looking at local maps of the school area, or walking around parish boundaries with pupils, this can give the children a clearer understanding of how communities have grown and expanded, and this then encourages them to ask themselves why this has happened. Okay, now this slide is a perfect example of one you shouldn't use in school. There's far too much text on it and the font is just too small. However, this presentation can be dramatically improved with just a few tweaks. But please don't try to read this slide yet. Ignore the content for the time being, because this is something that you'll have to look at when we talk about your first big task for this afternoon. Okay, on this slide we've listed your first big task. We'd like you to read and summarise the information from the previous two slides and present the most important information in the form of an infographic, and there'll be more about that later. Think about how you'd explain the key points to pupils in the class you're hoping to teach and to their parents or carers at an online parents meeting. Work with a partner or perhaps 2 or 3 people. That way you can share the work and you can also share the blame if things don't go to plan. Now, when you've completed the task, we'd like you to email a copy to either myself or to Bethan. Please do remember to include the names of everyone who has worked on the infographic in the name and that you save the work under. So for example, Stephen Smith and Rebecca Davis, infographic task. This will make it much easier for myself and Bethan to identify the work and keep a record of the work that's been submitted. Now, what we'd like you to do is to work on this activity during the remainder of this session, because this is going to be a relatively short introduction, and also during the break between now and our following session, the one we have later this afternoon. So you should have plenty of time to complete this task as a pair or as a group and email it across to us. Okay, we need to talk a little bit more about what an infographic actually is. Well, you've probably looked at lots of infographics in the past few weeks because they're a great way of getting information across in a very visual and a very memorable way. Have a look at this video. The speech in it is very, very quick, I'll warn you about that, but it does give you lots of great reasons for using infographics as a teaching aid in the classroom and also as a way of assessing children's understanding if you ask them to create their own infographic. Remember, to do so successfully, they need to be able to understand the topic, reproduce the information in a different format, use language and use ICT effectively, consider the needs of the audience they're preparing the work for, and they need to critically evaluate their work. This isn't simply a fancy poster. When you look at this video, think carefully though about the figures that are used. There are some incredibly high percentages. Could there be an element of exaggeration here? There's no evidence cited for these incredibly impressive statistics they present, so be cautious about exaggerating the impact here. Okay, I'm going to enjoy my coffee whilst you have a look at this video.
What is an infographic? Also known as information graphic, it is a visual representation of information and data, portrayed in the form of a chart, graph, or other image accompanied by minimal text, intended to give an easily understood overview, often of a complex subject. The very first known infographic dates back to 1626. It used to depict the rotation patterns of the sun. 160 years later, infographics used to present statistical graphs and charts, introducing the very first pie chart into the world. Around 1820s, geographical maps called supersigns included frames, scales, and Greek map legends, but essentially they were just infographics used by geographers that consisted consisted of symbols, icons, and indexes as representations. In Victorian England, a simple nurse used information graphics to persuade the Queen to improve conditions in military hospitals. But when we speak of information graphics as we know them today, we have to truly thank Edward Tufte, the pioneer in data visualization, often referred to as the Da Vinci of data, as his design principles and theories on good data visualization can be seen in many websites, magazines, and prints that we use today. But why do we use them? All humans are essentially visually wired. 50% of our brain is involved in visual processing of information that we observe from our surroundings. 70% of all human sensory receptors are located in the eyes, and it takes essentially just 10 milliseconds for a human brain to understand the observed visual scene, 150 milliseconds to process a written symbol, and 100 milliseconds to attach meaning to it. Our brain's visual system allows us to identify trends and patterns in the information we observe. And in the age of information overload, our brain seeks for fast solutions in understanding the world that surrounds us. Today, we receive 5 times as much information as we did in the 1980s. We consume around 34 gigabytes of information on an average day, and that's just outside work. The amount of the visualized information in literature increased in 400% since the 1990s, and a gigantic 9,900% increase of visuals on the internet, and that's just since 2007. Only 28% of words on a web page are actually read on an average visit. And infographics have proved to provide us information in a clear and quick way. Color visuals are proved to increase willingness to read and are labeled as more engaging information source. Visual icons on medical prescriptions increase the rate of understanding of the label up to 95%, and using a visual map to follow directions helps people understand their geographical orientation up to 300% better than people just following textual directions. Our brain's memory is essentially visual, as we tend to remember up to 80% of the things we see and do, compared to what we hear or read. Infographics can be used in multiple ways: presenting flowcharts versus comparisons of data, maps and timelines, visual articles, statistical graphs, informational design and architecture, photo or illustration lists. There are multiple tools out there in the market, just to name a few. Also, according to the study conducted at Wharton School of Business, only half of the audience are persuaded by purely verbal presentation. Though if we add visuals to the same verbal information, we will persuade 67% of the audience. So we'd like to thank the 24 people in the audience for your attention.
Okay, I think that's the only time I've heard Florence Nightingale referred to as a simple nurse in any kind of presentation. But as I said, there were some tremendously high percentages there. I think 9,900%. So be a little bit cautious there. Right, what I've done here is I've included some information on what will make your infographic effective. I've added this video because I think it sums this up pretty well. Now you need to think of your infographic as being A3 size, but when you create it, you might want to use one of the programs described in the last video, or you may simply want to create this on Word or on a publisher. I'll show you some examples on the next slide that have been completed already. Now remember, lots of text can be off-putting. Think back to my slide 4. Dark backgrounds with a light-coloured font are often the most effective. Your diagrams, images and text need to be well proportioned. What we'll do is we'll have a look at this video and then we'll look at the examples that I have on the following slide for you.
Do you know what it takes to create a unique and engaging infographic? Striking colors, neat typography, sensational headlines. There are so many roads that your infographic could go down. At its core, an infographic is supposed to be a quick and easy way of conveying information to your audience. It should visually appeal to the audience, convey essential data, build awareness, and maybe even generate leads if you're using infographics for business purposes. So, what makes an infographic effective? Number 1, informational honesty. We live in an internet age where fact-checking is easier than ever. So be sure that all the information in your infographic is truthful and honest. If you provide figures from somewhere else, back up these figures by asterisking your sources. Number 2, legibility. Although it's tempting to whip out the calligraphy style fonts in an effort to look fancy, You should prioritize fonts which are simple and easy to read. Also, avoid making your infographic too busy, keeping the style on the minimalist side. Number 3. Simple illustrations. Make your illustrations simple and ensure that they complement the data being conveyed in the infographic. Complex illustrations will distract your audience from what's important, your message. You're trying to communicate information, not replace Rembrandt. Number 4. Limited colors. Limit your color palette if you're trying to create an infographic which is visually appealing. As a general rule of thumb, use 3 main colors, with the lightest color forming the background, and the darker 2 colors breaking up different sections. Too many clashing colors will give your audience a headache. Number 5. Interactive elements. Although adding interactive elements to your infographic is appealing, consider whether it is relevant to what you're trying to achieve. If you need to convey a lot of information about different subjects, interactivity could be the easiest way to spread out this information without having to make your font tiny. And there you have it. Go forth and spread your message with your fancy new infographic.
Okay, hopefully the information there was useful. Right, let's have a look at 2 infographics. These are 2 examples that have been produced by PGCE students this year, and they were given a very similar task to the one that you've been set. Have a look at them with a very critical eye. First of all, which one catches your eye quickly? What do you like about it? What is eye-catching? Compare it with the other example. Looking at the other example, what could you do to improve upon this? Now, hopefully you're now all ready for a break. So what we'll do is we'll say goodbye and we'll see you at the start of our next session. So don't forget, our next session will be starting at 4 o'clock. And between now and 4 o'clock, what we'd like you to do is to work out who you're going to be working with for this task and actually complete the task and send it to either myself or to Bethan, so that when we start the next session at 4 o'clock, when we're going to look at geography schemes of work, we will have we'll have all of your work there, but we'll have some great examples to share with everyone. Okay, I hope that makes sense, and I'll look forward to seeing you later this afternoon at 4 o'clock. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.